Hashtag Chapter 1. The Scholar and the Sorcerer. The Sanctum Sanctorum was, to Dr. Stephen Strange, the safest place in all of creation. It was more than a building. It was a nexus, a fulcrum upon which countless realities pivoted. Dust motes, ancient and possibly sentient, danced in the slanted rays of light that poured through the oculus, the grand window that served as the sanctum's ever-watchful eye. The air hummed with contained power, smelling of old parchment, dried herbs, and the faint, sharp tang of ozone left in the wake of recently folded spacetime. Strange stood at the center of this quiet storm, the cloak of levitation a placid crimson sea at his shoulders. His hands, no longer trembling with a surgeon's nerve damage but steady with a sorcerer's discipline, moved in a complex, hypnotic ballet. Before him, a shimmering mandala of golden light expanded and contracted like a breathing lung. Within it, fractal patterns of emerald and sapphire chased each other in an infinite, cosmic loop. This was the cartographer's compass, a spell of his own devising. It was an audacious, almost arrogant piece of thaumaturgy designed to survey the dimensional barriers of his immediate multiversal cluster. A routine checkup, he'd told Wong, but in truth, it was a display of mastery. He was the Sorcerer Supreme, the grand architect of his reality's defense. He wasn't just guarding the house. He was mapping the entire celestial neighborhood. Sorceress of the infinite, heed my call, he murmured, his voice a low baritone that vibrated in the very air. Reveal the seams of what is, what was, and what could be. The mandala pulsed, emitting a low, harmonic chime. He felt the familiar tug of dimensional egress, the gentle stretching of reality's fabric as his consciousness prepared to skim across the surfaces of 1,000 different Earths. It was a sensation he had come to relish, the cool, intellectual thrill of observing the unobservable. He pushed the spell further, his ego a silent co-conspirator. Not just the nearest 1,000 realities. Why not 10,000? Why not 1,000,000? He was Dr. Stephen Strange. The universe didn't set his limits. He did. It was this flicker of hubris, this single discordant note of pride in a symphony of precise, mathematical magic, that caused the catastrophe. The harmonic chime shattered into a dissonant shriek. The golden mandala warped, its perfect geometry twisting into a violent, chaotic spiral. The emerald and sapphire fractals bled into a muddy, nauseating purple. Strange's eyes widened, his practiced calm evaporating in a flash of pure adrenaline. He tried to collapse the spell, to sever the connection, but it was like trying to catch lightning in a bottle. The spell wasn't just failing. It was feeding back, pulling on him. The air in the sanctum screamed. The eye of Agamotto flared on his chest, a desperate, incandescent green burst of protective energy. He felt a force of impossible magnitude hook into his very essence, a cosmic fishhook snagging his soul. The world around him dissolved not into darkness, but into a blinding, agonizing overabundance of everything. He saw a world where dinosaurs had developed philosophy, a timeline made entirely of sentient sound, and a billion other impossibilities in the span of a single, horrifying second. Then, with the sound of 1,000 panes of glass shattering at once, he was violently flung. His landing was less an arrival and more of a controlled crash. One moment he was tumbling through the kaleidoscopic chaos of the multiverse. The next he was on his feet, skidding to a halt on a floor of ancient, worn flagstones. The transition was so abrupt, so jarring, that for a moment his senses failed to parse the input. The smell hit him first. Roast chicken, candle wax, and a damp, earthy scent like old stone. Then the sound, the collective, sharp intake of hundreds of breaths, followed by a sudden, dead silence. He finally looked up, his mind, a finely tuned instrument accustomed to cosmic phenomena, struggling to categorize the scene. He was in a vast hall, its ceiling a breathtaking illusion of a stormy night sky, peppered with stars. Thousands of candles floated in midair, a flagrant violation of thermodynamics that made the physicist in him twitch. 4 long wooden tables stretched the length of the hall, laden with food and populated by what appeared to be children. Hundreds of children, all wearing identical black robes, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and wonder. At the far end of the hall, on a raised dais, sat a collection of adults, similarly robed, their expressions far more severe. Strange's gaze swept the room, his tactical mind taking over. Potential threats? Everyone. Escape routes? Numerous, but context was required. He subtly straightened his tunic, the cloak of levitation resettling on his shoulders with a proprietary rustle, as if offended by the undignified nature of their arrival. A shower of residual golden sparks, remnants of his shattered spell, rained down around him and sizzled out on the cold stone. The silence was broken by a single calm voice that cut through the tension like a silver knife. "It is not often," the voice said, full of a gentle, grandfatherly authority, "that we receive guests who neglect to use the front door." Strange's eyes snapped to the speaker. He was an old man, seated in a grand, throne-like chair at the center of the head table. He had a silver beard so long it was tucked into his belt, and he wore half-moon spectacles perched on a distinctly crooked nose. But it was his eyes that held Strange's attention. They were a brilliant, piercing blue, and they twinkled with an ancient, unnerving light. Strange, who had stared down cosmic deities and bargained with demons, felt an immediate and unwelcome prickle of caution. This was no mere academic. A palpable aura of energy, potent and wild, radiated from the man like heat from a furnace. Strange drew himself up to his full height, his innate arrogance a comfortable shield against the unknown. "My apologies," he said, his voice resonating with carefully modulated power. "The multiverse is a notoriously difficult place to navigate. One wrong turn, and you end up in, well, here." He gestured vaguely at the hall, the dismissal clear in his tone. A thin, sallow-skinned man with greasy black hair and a hooked nose sneered from the head table. "The multiverse? Does he mean to say he's mad?" A stern-looking woman with her hair in a tight bun adjusted her square-rimmed spectacles. "Be silent, Severus." "Headmaster." The old man, the headmaster, rose to his feet. He was taller than Strange had expected, and as he moved, the very air in the hall seemed to coalesce around him. He held a slender, gnarled piece of wood in his hand, a stick, Strange noted with detached curiosity. "I am Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry," he said, his voice still gentle, but now laced with an undeniable thread of steel. "And you, sir, are an uninvited intruder in a place of learning and safety. I must ask who you are and how you breached wards that have stood for 1,000 years. Strange felt a flicker of annoyance. He was not used to being questioned like a common burglar. "I am Dr. Stephen Strange, and your wards, as you call them, are a charmingly primitive form of dimensional ligature." They weren't breached so much as sidestepped. This was apparently the wrong thing to say. Dumbledore's twinkling eyes lost their mirth. The very temperature in the hall seemed to drop. The floating candles flickered in unison, their flames dancing nervously. The enchanted ceiling above them glitched, the stormy sky momentarily replaced by the hall's true, vaulted stone ceiling before snapping back. Strange felt it then, a low, dissonant hum at the edge of his senses. His magic, precise and cosmic, was resonating against the ambient energy of this place. It was like striking a tuning fork in a room full of crystal goblets. The fundamental frequencies were clashing, creating a dangerous vibration. Dumbledore felt it too, but not as a sound. He felt it as a tremor in the very soul of the castle. "Your magic is alien here," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "It is a discordant note in the song of this place. I will ask you one last time to surrender your weapon and explain yourself." He gestured to the eye of Agamotto, which pulsed with a soft, green light on Strange's chest. Strange scoffed. "This is no weapon, and I do not surrender." He didn't have time to say more. With a speed that belied his age, Dumbledore raised his stick, his wand, and a torrent of incandescent white light shot towards Strange. It was raw, untamed power, a bludgeon of pure intent. To Strange, it was like watching a caveman trying to perform surgery with a club. Crude, but undeniably effective. He didn't even flinch. His hands snapped up, fingers splaying into a complex sign. "By the hoary hosts of Hoggoth." A shimmering, circular shield of interlocking golden lines, a Tau mandala, materialized in the air before him. The white light struck it with the force of a battering ram, but instead of shattering, the light was caught, refracted, and harmlessly dissipated into a shower of glittering particles that rained down on the shocked students. Strange's expression was one of mild academic interest. Impressive raw power, he conceded, but utterly without finesse. He went on the offensive. His hands wove through the air, tracing glowing orange runes. Let's see how you handle something with a little more structure. He thrust his palms forward. The crimson bands of Sidorak. From his fingertips, ethereal scarlet ribbons of energy erupted, not as a projectile, but as if manifesting from the air itself. They snaked towards Dumbledore, not aiming to strike, but to ensnare, to bind him in an unbreakable cage of mystical force. The students gasped. Several teachers leaped to their feet, wands drawn. But Dumbledore remained calm. He watched the crimson bands approach, his mind working at an incredible speed. He felt their nature, not of this world, bound by rules he did not know. A direct counterspell would be useless. Brute force would fail. So he opted for something else entirely. With a graceful, almost lazy flick of his wand, he didn't cast a shield. He cast a transformation. The very air molecules in the path of the bands coalesced, shimmered, and took shape. In a heartbeat, a flock of silver sparrows burst into existence, chirping a silent, magical song. They didn't attack the crimson bands. They flew through them, their transfigured forms unraveling the complex extra-dimensional energy as they passed. The terrifying scarlet constructs dissolved into harmless red smoke, and the silver birds soared up to the enchanted ceiling before fading into motes of light. For the first time since his arrival, Strange was genuinely stunned. It was illogical. It was impossible. He hadn't just blocked the spell. He had convinced it to become something else. He had used a fundamental law of his reality, transmutation, to counter a law from another. It was like using poetry to solve a calculus equation. It shouldn't have worked. A slow smile touched Dumbledore's lips. Finesse, he said softly, is a matter of perspective. He raised the Elder Wand again, and this time, there was no gentle warning in his eyes. He meant to end this. A focused, brilliant beam of pure magical power, golden and white, erupted from its tip. Strange's mind raced. This was different. This was focused, refined, and wielded with the kind of experience that came from centuries of practice. His own arrogance had been a mistake. This old man was his equal. Shield of the Seraphim, he roared, slamming his hands together. A massive, multi-layered buckler of crystalline blue energy formed before him, its surfaces covered in glowing, angelic script. The two forces met in the center of the Great Hall. The impact was not an explosion. It was a scream. It was a sound that was not a sound, a shriek that was neither sound nor light, but of reality itself being torn. The clashing energies of two entirely different forms of magic, one cosmic and mathematical, the other innate and emotional, created a paradox, a resonance that shook the very foundations of the castle. A shockwave of pure dissonance erupted outwards. The floating candles were all extinguished at once, plunging the hall into the dim light of the enchanted sky. The great oak doors at the far end of the hall rattled in their frames. A deep groaning sound came from the very stones of the castle, as if the ancient wards that protected it were crying out in pain. Strange and Dumbledore were both thrown backwards, their spells shattering. Strange landed gracefully, the cloak cushioning his fall. Dumbledore stumbled but was caught by the stern-faced witch, Professor McGonagall. Both men were breathing heavily, their eyes locked, the animosity replaced by a sudden, dawning horror. They both felt what their duel had wrought. They had not just fought each other. They had punched a hole in the very fabric of this place's existence. What have you done? Dumbledore whispered, his face pale, his gaze sweeping over his darkened, terrified school. It wasn't me, it was us, Strange countered, his voice grim. He could still feel the vibration, the wound in the local reality. Your magic is a chaotic, emotional force. Mine is a structured, dimensional one. Forcing them together at this magnitude, It creates a feedback loop, a dimensional tear. As if on cue, a first-year Hufflepuff girl near the front shrieked and pointed a trembling finger. Everyone turned to look. Near the Slytherin table, a patch of the ancient stone wall was wrong. The color was leaching out of it, the solid gray stone turning a dull, lifeless monochrome, as if it were a black and white photograph inserted into the world. The texture was smoothing out, the cracks and imperfections disappearing, leaving a blank, featureless surface. The very concept of the wall was being unwritten. A silver goblet of pumpkin juice on the table nearby suddenly turned to gray dust. Nearly headless Nick, who had been floating near the scene, flickered violently, his semi-transparent form becoming almost entirely see-through for a terrifying second before he solidified again, his face a mask of spectral terror. The magic of the castle, rich and potent, was being drained, consumed, erased. Dumbledore's eyes widened with horrified understanding. He looked at Strange, the full weight of the catastrophe settling upon them both. Strange met his gaze, his face a mask of grim certainty. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the heavy burden of the Sorcerer Supreme. "We didn't just open a door," he said, his voice low and dire, echoing in the terrified silence of the Great Hall. "We rang a dinner bell." Chapter 2, A Wound in the World. The last echoes of their duel died in the cavernous space of the Great Hall, leaving a silence as profound as a vacuum. Dust motes, disturbed by torrents of cosmic and chaotic energy, danced in the soft light of the enchanted ceiling, each a tiny star in a galaxy of debris. The air, thick with the scent of ozone and something ancient, like petrified lightning, was a palpable weight. On one side of the hall, Albus Dumbledore stood, his elder wand held loosely, its tip no longer blazing but smoking like a snuffed candle. His chest rose and fell in a slow, controlled rhythm, but the piercing blue of his eyes, usually twinkling with mirth, was now a hard, sharp sapphire of calculation. On the other, Dr. Stephen Strange lowered his hands, the fiery mandalas of power collapsing into sparks that hissed out of existence. His cloak of levitation, which had billowed and swirled like a thing alive, settled around his shoulders with a proprietary rustle. He was assessing, analyzing. The old wizard's magic was absurd. It was formless, potent, and utterly undisciplined, lashing out with the raw fury of a thunderstorm rather than the precise, geometric elegance of a scalpel. Yet, its power was undeniable. It had met his own reality-bending constructs not by unraveling them, but by simply refusing to yield, imposing its own ludicrous rules onto the fabric of space. A stalemate, it would seem, Dumbledore said, his voice calm, though it carried the resonance of the immense power he still held in check. He took a tentative step forward, the crunch of shattered stone under his boot the only sound in the hall. The students remained frozen, a sea of wide eyes and gaping mouths. "A temporary cessation of hostilities," Strange corrected, his tone clipped and condescending. He ran a diagnostic eye over his surroundings. The architecture was archaic. The magical signature of the place was a messy, layered cacophony, and his own connection to the Sanctum Sanctorum was completely severed. This wasn't just another dimension. It was a pocket reality, hermetically sealed and stubbornly self-contained. "Now, if you'll direct me to the nearest dimensional gateway or significant convergence of ley lines, I will relieve you of my presence." Professor McGonagall, her face a mask of stern disbelief, finally found her voice. "A dimensional what? Speak plainly, man. You have attacked the headmaster and endangered hundreds of children." Strange waved a dismissive hand, the gesture infuriatingly casual. "An unfortunate but necessary diagnostic. I needed to ascertain the nature and intensity of the local energy fields. Your headmaster was merely the most prominent power source. The children were never in any real danger from me." Before Dumbledore could offer a wry retort about the definition of danger, he stiffened. A subtle tremor, not of the stone beneath his feet but of the very air, passed through the hall. It was a flicker, a momentary desaturation of color, as if the world had blinked. The enchanted ceiling, a perfect replica of the starry night sky outside, wavered. For a split second, the constellation of Draco vanished, leaving a patch of empty, velvety blackness before reappearing. Strange felt it too. It was a dissonant frequency, a faint, discordant hum on the edge of his mystical senses, like a single off-key string in the grand orchestra of the cosmos. His spell hadn't just punched a hole through dimensions. The impact, and the subsequent clash with the old wizard's chaotic magic, had created a paradox. A ripple. And something was being drawn to the sound. What was that? A sharp, clear voice asked, cutting through the tense silence. Strange turned. Pushing her way past a stunned-looking Ron Weasley and a wary Harry Potter was a young woman with a cascade of bushy brown hair and an expression of fierce, unyielding curiosity. Her eyes, wide and intelligent, weren't fixed on the destruction, but on him. She carried herself with an academic's poise, as if the battle had been a fascinating, albeit loud, practical demonstration. "Hermione, get back," Ron hissed, grabbing her sleeve. She shook him off, her gaze never leaving Strange. "Excuse me," she began, her voice gaining confidence with every word. "I don't mean to interrupt, but your spellcasting is utterly fascinating. It doesn't seem to follow Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration in the slightest. And the somatic components, they're not based on traditional wand movements. Are they tied to a specific runic language? The geometry of your energy constructs suggests a mathematical underpinning that's far more complex than anything in advanced arithmancy." Strange blinked. Amidst a crowd of terrified children and hostile staff, this girl, a teenager, no older than 16, was a beacon of pure, unfiltered intellect. She wasn't asking who he was, but how he worked. "It's complicated," Strange said, a hint of his old professorial arrogance creeping back into his voice. It was a relief to be in the presence of an inquisitive mind. "My magic is not innate. It is a science, the art of drawing upon extra-dimensional energy to reshape the quantum foam of reality itself." Hermione's eyes lit up, a hungry fire of comprehension within them. "Extra-dimensional? So you're confirming the existence of parallel realities?" Professor Binns always treats the subject as theoretical folklore, and you don't use a wand as a focus. How do you channel the energy without it splintering your consciousness? "Discipline." "The wand," Strange scoffed, glancing at the stick in Dumbledore's hand, "is a crutch. A training wheel. It limits the caster, forcing an infinite spectrum of possibilities through a single, crude aperture. It's a conductor," Hermione retorted, her brow furrowing in passionate defense. "It focuses our intent. Magic in our world is tied to emotion, to will. The wand is an extension of that will, a way to give shape to something that is fundamentally a part of us." "Your magic sounds impersonal. Cold." "It is precise," Strange countered. "Emotion is a variable, a flaw in the system. It leads to miscalculation and catastrophic failure. Magic should be an act of supreme intellect, not a fit of pique." As they spoke, Dumbledore was moving slowly along the edge of the head table, one hand trailing against the ancient wood. His eyes were distant, focused on something unseen. Professor Snape, his face paler than usual, glided to his side. "Albus," Snape murmured, his voice a low drawl that barely carried. "The wards. They are afraid. There is a chill seeping through, a dampness in the magic of this place." "I feel it, Severus," Dumbledore replied, his gaze now fixed on the spot where Draco's constellation had flickered. The clash, it was like two opposing notes struck with such force that they shattered the instrument. He turned back to Strange and Hermione, his expression grim. Their academic debate was suddenly framed by a far more urgent reality. "Your diagnostic doctor has had unforeseen consequences. Your methods, so alien to this world, have torn a whole knot in the fabric of space, but in the very soul of this castle." Strange raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Soul is an unquantifiable, sentimental term. Be specific. What are the symptoms?" As if on cue, the candles floating high above them began to sputter. Their warm, golden light flickered violently, casting long, dancing shadows that writhed like living things. A wave of profound cold washed through the hall, a cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with a deep, creeping dread. It was the cold of a forgotten tomb, the chilling silence of a dead star. That, Dumbledore said softly, his voice heavy with ancient sorrow. That is the symptom. Strange's eyes narrowed. He closed them for a moment, extending his astral senses. The dissonant hum he had felt earlier was now a low, predatory thrum. It was the frequency of a scavenger, a bottom feeder from the void between realities. He had encountered such things before, creatures that fed on decaying timelines, on the runoff from cosmic events. This one was small, mindless, but it was hungry. And their duel had just rung a dinner bell made of shattered magic. He opened his eyes, a new, unwelcome understanding dawning. It's a parasite, he stated, the words tasting like ash. A metaphysical entity drawn to the paradoxical resonance you and I created. It feeds on magical energy. Hermione paled, her intellectual curiosity momentarily eclipsed by genuine fear. Feeds on it? What does that mean? Hogwarts is one of the most magical places on Earth. It's built on a confluence of, she trailed off, looking to Dumbledore. Ancient, deeply layered magic, the headmaster finished for her. He looked at Strange, a silent demand in his eyes. You brought this a parasite here. You must help us remove it. Strange bristled at the command. I am not your janitor. My priority is returning to my own dimension. This is your quaint little reality. You and your wand wavers can clean up your own messes. He turned, intending to find a quiet corner to attempt a more controlled portal. You can't, Hermione said, her voice small but firm. Strange stopped, turning back to her with an irritated glare. And why not? Because of the wards, she explained, her mind working furiously to connect his world to hers. You said your spell failed because this place is magically sealed. Those seals are the castle's defenses. Professor Dumbledore said they're afraid now. If this creature is feeding on the castle's magic, it's feeding on the very thing that's keeping you trapped here. If the wards fall, the castle will be defenseless, and you, she took a deep breath, will still be stuck, but in a dying husk. You can't leave until the castle is healed. Our problem is your problem. For the second time that night, Stephen Strange was rendered speechless by the incisive logic of a teenage girl. He hated it. He hated that she was right. He hated the primitive, emotional magic that had caused this mess. Most of all, he hated that his own arrogance had landed him here, shackled to this medieval institution by the very laws of reality he sought to command. He looked from Hermione's determined face to Dumbledore's weary but resolute expression. The headmaster was watching him, not with anger, but with a strange, discerning patience, as if he were a particularly difficult puzzle to be solved. The girl is wise beyond her years, Doctor, Dumbledore said, a faint glimmer returning to his eyes. Hogwarts has a way of nurturing such minds. She is correct. Your escape is intrinsically linked to our survival. Strange let out a long, frustrated sigh, the sound echoing in the now chilling hall. He raised his hands, not to cast a spell, but in a gesture of reluctant surrender. Fine. Let's define the threat. He wove his fingers through the air, his movements fluid and precise. A complex array of golden, glowing lines coalesced before him, forming a three-dimensional map of the castle. It was a shimmering, architectural ghost, complete with moving staircases and tiny, unaware points of light representing every person inside. But now, overlaid on the familiar structure, was something else. A dark, spreading stain, like ink bleeding into parchment, pulsed rhythmically at the castle's core, near the dungeons. Fine, black tendrils snaked outwards from it, wrapping around the golden lines of the castle's magical signature, constricting them. This is the echo of ruin, Strange announced, his voice regaining its authoritative, clinical tone. It's a non-sentient organism. It doesn't think. It only consumes. Right now, it's latched onto the primary magical source, the wards you spoke of. It's draining them, converting their unique energy into a substance it can metabolize. Snape peered at the glowing map, his black eyes narrowed in disgust. Can you destroy it? Destroying it is simple, Strange replied. The problem is excising it without causing a catastrophic collapse of the host. It has woven itself into the very foundation of this castle's enchantments. To attack it with overwhelming force would be like using a sledgehammer for brain surgery. It would shatter everything. Dumbledore stroked his long, silver beard, his eyes fixed on the pulsating darkness in Strange's projection. So, we require a surgeon's touch, not a warrior's might. He looked at Strange, a profound and challenging understanding in his gaze. It seems we both have much to learn. Your power is precise, but it is alien to this place. My magic is of the same heart as the castle, but it may lack the precision to cut away the sickness without killing the patient. A low, mournful groan echoed through the great hall, not from any person, but from the stones themselves. Above them, the enchanted ceiling flickered more violently. A dozen stars winked out at once, not to reappear. The darkness was spreading. Another tendril on Strange's map tightened its grip, and one of the main arteries of Hogwarts magic turned from a healthy gold to a sickly, pale yellow. The students gasped, a collective murmur of fear finally breaking their stunned silence. "It's accelerating," Hermione whispered, her eyes wide with horror as she watched the magical lifeblood of her home being siphoned away. Strange stared at the map, his jaw tight. This was no longer a theoretical problem or an inconvenient detour. It was a ticking clock. The echo of ruin, a creature he had inadvertently invited, was devouring the world around him. His arrogance had not only stranded him, it had unleashed a plague upon this strange, impossible school. For the first time since becoming Sorcerer Supreme, he was faced with a problem he couldn't solve with sheer power or superior knowledge alone. He would have to learn the rules of this absurd, emotional magic, and he would have to learn them fast. The cold deepened, and from the direction of the dungeons, a faint rhythmic thump-thump began to sound, like a diseased and monstrous heart starting to beat within the very bones of Hogwarts. Chapter 3. The Sour Note in the Symphony. The headmaster's office was a place of profound, organized chaos. Whirring silver instruments spun on spindly legs, puffing out small clouds of violet smoke. Portraits of past headmasters snored gently in their frames. At the center of it all, perched serenely on his desk, sat Albus Dumbledore, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. Opposite him, Dr. Stephen Strange stood with his arms crossed, his cloak of levitation fidgeting at his shoulders like an impatient child. Between them, a plate of lemon drops remained untouched, a testament to the tension coiled in the air. Hermione Granger, seated to the side, felt like a translator at a summit between two nations who not only spoke different languages, but operated on entirely different principles of physics. "We must quantify the threat," Strange began, his voice crisp and devoid of preamble. He paced before the fireplace, his movements precise and economical. "This our echo of ruin. We know it was drawn by the paradoxical resonance of our magics clashing. We know it feeds on that energy. I need to know its dimensional frequency, its decay signature, the precise nature of the noise it creates in the local reality. Without data, we are simply thrashing in the dark." Dumbledore's eyes, a brilliant, piercing blue behind his half-moon spectacles, twinkled. "An excellent and most logical assessment, Doctor. However, you are attempting to measure a nightmare with a ruler." He picked up a silver instrument that resembled a miniature astrolabe. "This entity is not a creature of logic. It is a thing of raw, mindless hunger. It does not think, it feels. It is drawn to magical wounds, to places where the fabric of this world is thin or torn. Everything can be measured," Strange countered, a familiar edge of intellectual arrogance creeping into his tone. "The frequency of a scream, the energy output of a supernova, the chaotic patterns of a butterfly's flight. If it exists, it follows rules. We simply need to discover what they are." "Indeed," Dumbledore said, his voice gentle but firm. "But some rules are not written in the language of mathematics. They are written in memory, in emotion, in the echoes of 1,000 years of hope and fear that soak the stones of this castle. You see a problem to be solved. I see a wound that must be coaxed into healing." Strange stopped pacing and fixed the old wizard with an intense stare. "Your wound is consuming the magical radiation that powers your wards. When they fall, this castle becomes a beacon for every interdimensional stray with an appetite. Your poetic metaphors are a luxury we cannot afford. And your scalpel is useless if you cannot find the heart of the patient," Dumbledore retorted, his smile never wavering. Hermione cleared her throat, drawing both powerful gazes. Perhaps, she ventured, her voice steadier than she felt. We can do both? Dr. Strange needs data. Professor, you've said the entity is drawn to magical wounds. Hogwarts must be full of them. Places of great magical conflict, or tragedy, or powerful, forgotten enchantments. If we look for historical accounts of magical disturbances, we might find a pattern. A location. Strange looked at her, a flicker of genuine appreciation in his eyes. He saw a mind that, while untrained in the cosmic arts, sought to bridge the gap between theory and application. A sound hypothesis, Miss Granger. Correlate historical anomalies with current energy fluctuations. A starting point. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled more brightly. An excellent suggestion, Hermione. The library, I believe, would be our most prudent first stop. Knowledge, after all, is a magic all its own. The Hogwarts library was a sanctuary of silence and the scent of aged parchment. Strange found it quaint. He was accustomed to the infinite astral shelves of the Library of Camartage, where books whispered their contents directly into the mind of the reader. Here, everything was painstakingly physical. He wasted no time. Closing his eyes, he summoned a delicate, glowing construct of golden energy, a complex mandala woven from intersecting circles and intricate lines of light. It floated over the palm of his hand, rotating slowly. A simple diagnostic spell, he explained to Hermione, who watched with wide, fascinated eyes. It will scan the ambient magical field for the specific paradoxical frequency we generated. It won't find the entity itself, but it will lead us to the areas most affected by its presence, the wounds, as your headmaster calls them. Hermione, meanwhile, was already buried in a mountain of books. Hogwarts, a history was supplemented by more obscure texts, significant sites of sorceress resonance, magical blights and castle curses, and a heavy, leather-bound tome simply titled Unexplained Phenomena. There are patterns, she murmured, tracing a line on a hand-drawn map of the castle. The cursed corridor on the 3rd floor, where Fluffy was kept. The site of the duel between Gryffindor and Slytherin's portraits in 1692. The place Myrtle's bathroom now stands, all sites of immense, concentrated magical or emotional events. Strange's mandala pulsed, emitting a low hum. A thin line of golden light projected from its center, quivering in the air. I'm getting a resonance, he said, his focus absolute. Faint, but coherent. It's leading down. They followed the shimmering thread of light, descending through the castle's winding staircases. Strange moved with a surgeon's confidence, his eyes locked on the golden line. Dumbledore trailed behind them, his long robes sweeping the stone floors, his expression one of calm, patient observation. The golden thread led them past classrooms and empty corridors, finally stopping before a blank stretch of wall on the 7th floor. Here, Strange announced, his brow furrowed. The energy signature is strongest here, but it's diffuse, scattered. As if the source is constantly in motion, yet anchored to this spot. He ran a hand over the cold stone. There is nothing here. Hermione's eyes widened in recognition. She looked from the blank wall to a tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy being clubbed by trolls, then back again. Oh, you are brilliant, she whispered, looking at Strange's spell. Both of you. Your spell found the energy, Professor, and your intuition led us to the why. I confess I do not follow, Strange said, his patience thinning. This isn't just a wall, Hermione explained, her voice trembling with excitement. This is the entrance to the room of requirement. Dumbledore's smile finally reached his eyes. Precisely. The place that becomes whatever the seeker has the greatest need of. A room of infinite possibility. What better place for a creature that feeds on paradox to make its lair? To enter, one had to walk past the wall 3 times, concentrating on what one needed. Dumbledore took the lead. We need to find a creature that does not belong, he said, his voice calm and clear as he paced. We need to find the echo of ruin. A heavy, ornate wooden door shimmered into existence on the stone wall. Strange raised an eyebrow, a flicker of professional interest overriding his frustration. A pocket dimension keyed to psychic intent. Crude, but effective. Dumbledore pushed the door open, revealing not a room, but a cavernous space that defied logic. It was a cathedral of lost things. Mountains of teetering furniture rose towards a ceiling that was lost in shadow. Aisles were formed from precarious stacks of forgotten books, their pages yellowed and brittle. Broken potion bottles glittered like jewels in the dim light, and everywhere there was the faint, phantom echo of 1,000 desperate needs, 1,000 forgotten desires. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, but underneath it was something else. A charge, like the air before a lightning strike. Strange mandala flared, the golden light intensifying. "It's here," he whispered. "The resonance is overwhelming." They moved deeper into the labyrinth of forgotten objects. The sheer chaos of the place was an assault on Strange's ordered mind. This was the antithesis of the Sanctum Sanctorum's meticulous organization. This was magic left to fester, a junkyard of intent. Dumbledore, however, seemed perfectly at home. He touched the spine of a dusty book here, righted a fallen candelabra there. He was not looking with his eyes, but with something deeper. "The castle's memory is troubled," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. "It feels a coldness, a sour note in a grand symphony." They rounded a tower of broken desks and saw it. It wasn't a creature in any conventional sense. It was a patch of reality that had gone wrong. It hung in the air like a heat shimmer, a distortion about 10 feet across that bent the light of the room around it. The objects seen through it were warped and twisted. A suit of armor appeared to melt like wax. A grandfather clock ran backwards, its hands spinning wildly. There was no sound, but Strange could feel a profound, soul-deep silence emanating from it, a void that consumed all energy. As it drifted slowly through the air, the objects it passed over didn't just get dusty. They aged centuries in a second. Wood petrified and crumbled to gray powder. Brass tarnished, rusted, and flaked away. It was entropy given form. By the hoary hosts of Hogwarts, Strange breathed, his hands already moving, weaving intricate patterns of light. A localized reality failure. "It is feeding," Dumbledore said, his voice grim. He drew his wand, the Elder Wand, and its tip glowed with a soft, white light. "This room is a nexus of forgotten magic. A feast." Here, the clash of their philosophies became a clash of actions. "We must contain it," Strange declared, his voice taking on the command of a head surgeon in the operating theater. "A perimeter. Isolate it from its food source." He clapped his hands together, and a vast, shimmering shield of interlocking hexagons sprang into existence, a dome of golden energy that attempted to encase the distortion. It was a feat of immense power and precision, a perfect geometric cage. But as the shield touched the edge of the echo, it didn't hold. The distortion didn't break it, it simply unmade it. The perfect, mathematical lines of Strange's shield dissolved into meaningless static, the golden light sputtering and dying like a faulty bulb. The spell unraveled at a conceptual level. Strange staggered back, a grunt of surprise and effort escaping his lips. It's not just consuming energy. It's consuming the laws that govern it. Dumbledore stepped forward, his expression grave. "It does not understand laws, Doctor. But perhaps it will understand power." He raised the Elder Wand, and for the first time, Strange felt the full, terrifying depth of the old man's magic. It wasn't the precise intellectual force he wielded. It was elemental. It was a storm gathering in the vast, dusty room. With a great cry, Dumbledore unleashed a torrent of silver-white fire, a roaring phoenix of pure magical force that soared across the cavern and crashed into the distortion. For a moment, it seemed to work. The fire engulfed the void, the room blazing with light. But then the impossible happened. The silence at the heart of the echo deepened, and the silver flames were drawn inward, not with a roar, but with a sickening, silent inhalation. The fire was consumed, and the distortion seemed to shimmer with greater intensity, its edges expanding. It had fed on one of the most powerful spells Strange had ever witnessed, as if it were a candle flame. "It's stronger," Hermione gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "We cannot attack it directly," Strange concluded, his mind racing, processing the failure of both logic and raw power. "Any energy we direct at it, structured or chaotic, becomes its sustenance." It's a perfect parasite. They stood in a triangle, the two masters of magic momentarily defeated, the young which their only witness. The echo of ruin drifted aimlessly, drawn by the strongest concentration of magic in the room. It moved towards a small, cluttered alcove, where a stone bust of a warlock sat wearing a dusty wig and a tarnished, elegant diadem. As the distortion passed over the diadem, something new happened. The tiara did not crumble to dust. Instead, a faint, dark mist began to leak from it. The mist was drawn into the echo, and as it was absorbed, the void pulsed with a malevolent, almost sentient awareness. For the first time, it seemed to notice them. A wave of pure, undiluted despair washed over them. It wasn't just an emotion. It was a magical attack. Strange felt his intellect, his greatest weapon, turn against him. A sudden, crushing certainty that all his knowledge was meaningless, that the multiverse was a chaotic accident, and that his struggles were utterly futile. Beside him, he heard Hermione let out a small sob, her academic curiosity drowned in a sudden wave of hopelessness. Only Dumbledore seemed to resist, his face a mask of immense strain, his knuckles white on the Elder Wand. What was that? Strange forced out, shaking his head to clear the psychic residue. Dumbledore's gaze was fixed on the diadem, a look of profound horror dawning on his face. The ancient magic of the object, tainted by a soul fragment and centuries of loss, was being twisted, weaponized by the echo. It is not merely feeding on forgotten magic anymore, the old wizard said, his voice a low, dreadful whisper that cut through the silence of the room. It has found a vessel. It is learning. It is poisoning the very memories of this castle, turning its greatest treasures into weapons of despair. Strange looked from the pulsing, newly aware distortion to the horrified face of the headmaster and understood. Their problem had just evolved. This was no longer a simple extermination. It was an exorcism, and the soul they had to save was that of Hogwarts itself. Chapter 4: The Caduceus and the Elder Wand. The air in the headmaster's office was thick with the scent of old parchment, lemon drops, and the faint ozonic tang that now clung to Stephen Strange like a second shadow. Below, in the castle's infirmary, Madame Pomfrey was tending to the handful of students who had fainted from the sheer psychic pressure of the echo of Ruin's passage. The rest of the student body, blissfully unaware of the true nature of the magical surge, were sequestered in their common rooms, an edict from Dumbledore ensuring their safety. In the circular office, a fragile truce held. Fox trilled a low, mournful note from his perch, his bead-like eyes fixed on the sorcerer. Strange stood with his arms crossed, the cloak of levitation twitching restlessly at his shoulders, a stark crimson slash against the room's cluttered warmth. Hermione Granger sat hunched over a heavy, leather-bound tome, her brow furrowed in concentration, while Albus Dumbledore stared into the heart of a whirring silver instrument, his expression uncharacteristically grave. "It's adapting," Dumbledore said, his voice a low murmur. The silver device spun slower, emitting a discordant chime. "The castle's wards are holding, but they are porous. The entity is no longer just feeding on the resonance of your arrival, Doctor. It is learning to feed on any magic it can find. Simple charms. The ambient energy of the enchanted ceilings. It is becoming a true parasite." Strange pushed off the wall, pacing. "We tried a direct assault. My eldritch bolts passed through it. Your stunning spells were absorbed. It has no physical form to attack, no mind to assail. Because it's not a creature, not really," Hermione piped up, not looking from her book. Her finger traced a line of ancient runes. "It's a wound, a tear in the fabric of things. The book calls them phantasmal voids. They don't exist in a reality so much as they exist between them. They're drawn to inconsistencies, paradoxes, places where the rules don't quite add up. Our duel," Strange finished, the words tasting like ash. His arrogance had created this wound. "My precise, dimensionally sourced energy clashing with your innate, emotionally fueled magic. We created the perfect paradox. A feast." Dumbledore finally looked away from his device, his blue eyes piercing. "And a feast is precisely what we must offer it now. A final, irresistible meal that it cannot possibly digest." Strange stopped his pacing. You want to lure it? Indeed, the headmaster said, a flicker of his familiar twinkle returning. If it feeds on paradox, we shall create the ultimate one. An anchor of perfect, unwavering stability, filled with the most chaotic and powerful energy this world knows. Hermione's head shot up. Stability and chaos in one location? Sir, that's a magical contradiction of the highest order. The resulting energy release could be catastrophic. Precisely, Miss Granger, Dumbledore said calmly. That is why we will not allow it to be released. We will contain it. Implode it. We will offer the echo of ruin a baited trap from which there is no escape. He turned his gaze to Strange. Your magic, Doctor. You spoke of geometry, of structure. Can you create a vessel? A container of pure, unyielding order. Strange's mind raced, visualizing the complex matrices and interlocking mandalas. A tesseract fold? A Klein bottle construct looped through the astral plane? I can create a containment field of immense strength and perfect symmetry. A cage of pure mathematics and cosmic law. Nothing chaotic can exist within its boundaries for long without being rationalized. He flexed his fingers, phantom sparks of orange light dancing at their tips. But what is the bait? What energy is chaotic enough to draw the entity, yet meaningful enough to act as the anchor? Dumbledore's expression softened, a deep, ancient sadness entering his eyes. It was a look Strange recognized, the look of a man who had lived too long and seen too much. Not what? The old wizard corrected gently. Who? The greatest magic, the most potent and unpredictable, is not found in a spell or a potion. It stems from the heart. It is born of love. Strange skepticism must have shown on his face. Love? You propose to fight a dimensional parasite with a sentiment. Do not mistake sentiment for weakness, Doctor. Dumbledore's voice was firm, yet kind. Love is a force more wonderful and more terrible than death, than human intelligence, than the forces of nature. It is the deepest magic. It is chaotic, irrational, and in its purest form, utterly unbreakable. I will provide the anchor. Hermione looked between the two men, her brilliant mind finally grasping the terrifying elegance of the plan. You're going to use a memory, she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. A powerful, emotionally charged memory. It will be the chaotic core, the heart of the trap. Dumbledore gave a small, solemn nod. The entity will be drawn to the paradox, an object of pure, chaotic emotion, housed within a shell of perfect, unyielding logic. It will rush to consume it, but it will find the core indelible, incompatible. And your construct, Doctor, will be the jaws of the trap. A profound and unsettling respect for the old wizard settled over Strange. He had battled cosmic horrors, bartered with demonic entities, and stared into the abyss of infinity. But this was a different kind of power. Intimate, sacrificial, frighteningly human. Where? Strange asked, his voice now devoid of its earlier condescension. Where it all began, Dumbledore replied. The Great Hall. The Great Hall was a cathedral of silence. The enchanted ceiling was a roiling canvas of bruised purple and angry gray clouds, mirroring the encroaching threat. The house tables had been vanished, leaving a vast, echoing stone floor. At the center stood Dumbledore, his elder wand held loosely in one hand, his eyes closed. Hermione stood near the towering entrance, her own wand out, muttering the incantations for a complex series of reinforcing wards that shimmered like heat haze around the room's perimeter. This was her role, to ensure the shockwave, should they fail, did not level the castle. Strange stood opposite Dumbledore, his feet planted wide. This was his stage. He brought his hands together, then drew them apart, a thread of crackling orange energy spinning between them. The air hummed, vibrating with a power that felt alien and ancient within the castle's walls. The construct must be absolute, he said, his voice resonating with arcane power. Once I begin, the field will form. It will be a perfect sphere of order. Anything that enters will be subject to its laws. Dumbledore opened his eyes. They were filled with a sorrow, so deep it seemed to absorb the light. I am ready, Doctor. Strange nodded. He began the somatic gestures, a fluid and complex dance of fingers, hands, and arms. Golden-orange rings of energy sprang into existence around him, spinning in counter-rotating orbits. Glyphs and symbols from 1,000 dead languages burned in the air, forming a lattice of pure mathematics. Asterisk by the crimson bands of Sidorak, I shape this space. By the 7 rings of Ragador, I bind its form. By the eye of Agamotto, I seal the gate. Asterisk. A sphere of shimmering, translucent gold began to form around Dumbledore. It was not a bubble. It was a complex, multi-layered orb of interlocking geometric patterns, a 3-dimensional mandala that seemed to fold space in upon itself. The very air inside it grew still, the motes of dust freezing in place, stripped of their random motion. The humming intensified into a single, pure, resonant tone, the sound of perfect order. As the final sigil locked into place, Dumbledore raised the Elder Wand. He did not point it at anything. He simply held it, and from its tip, a single silvery thread of light emerged, glowing with a soft, ethereal luminescence. It wasn't a spell. It was raw memory, pulled forth by an act of supreme will and unimaginable pain. Strange, even from outside the construct, could feel the sheer emotional gravity of it. He saw fleeting, ghostly images coalesce in the silvery mist, a laughing girl with long auburn hair, a heated, terrifying argument between 3 young men, a flash of green light going astray. The feeling that poured from it was a maelstrom, a paradox in itself, an agony of guilt wrapped around a core of the most profound, protective love. It was the memory of Ariana. The castle groaned. The temperature in the great hall plummeted. A patch of wall near the teacher's dais began to decay, the stone turning to a gray, porous dust. A low, dissonant static filled the air, the sound of reality being unwritten. "It's coming," Hermione called out, her voice strained. Her reinforcing wards flickered violently. From the corners of the room, from the very stones themselves, shadows began to bleed. They were not an absence of light, but a presence of nothingness. The shadows congealed, flowing across the floor towards the golden sphere, drawn by the impossible siren song of Dumbledore's memory. The echo of ruin had no shape, no eyes, no mouth, but as it converged, it took on the appearance of a living oil slick of anti-reality, a hole in the world that pulsed with ravenous hunger. It touched the edge of strange construct. There was no sound, but a wave of psychic pressure slammed into him, making his teeth ache. The entity recoiled for a moment, repulsed by the sphere's perfect order. But the lure of the chaotic memory within was too great. It surged forward, pouring itself against the golden lattice, seeking a crack, an imperfection, a way in. "It's testing the perimeter," Strange grunted, his muscles straining as he held the complex spell together. The golden light of the sphere flickered. "The paradox is too strong. It wants in. Now, Doctor." Dumbledore's voice boomed, though his lips barely moved. "Close the trap." The entity, in its desperation, found a way. It did not break the sphere, but instead thinned itself, seeping between the geometric lines of force, sacrificing its own coherence to reach the prize. It poured into the sphere, a tide of absolute nothingness surging towards the silvery memory. Strange saw his moment. With a roar of effort, he clenched his fists. Asterisk collapse. Asterisk. The interlocking patterns of the golden sphere did not shatter. They folded inward. The perfect, ordered space began to shrink, compressing everything inside it. The echo of ruin, halfway to its goal, was caught. It tried to pull back, but the geometry of the construct was now a one-way street. It tried to surge forward and consume the memory, but the pure, loving core of it was anathema to its nature, an anchor it could not devour or displace. It was trapped. The golden sphere shrank from the size of a carriage to the size of a man, the humming tone rising in pitch to a piercing shriek. The roiling nothingness within was compressed, folded, and rationalized. Its paradoxical nature was being forcibly smoothed out by the absolute laws of Strange's magic. It was like trying to force a square peg into a round hole, if the hole was infinitely dense and the peg was made of pure chaos. Together, Dumbledore cried out, and for the first time, he pointed the Elder Wand directly at the shrinking sphere. A jet of pure, brilliant white light erupted from its tip, not a curse, not a hex, but an expression of pure, concentrated will. It was the magic of protection, of preservation, of Hogwarts itself. Strange added his own power, pouring raw dimensional energy not into the construct, but around it, reinforcing the external pressure. He wrapped the collapsing sphere in the crimson bands of Sidorak, squeezing it with the force of a dying star. Inside the rapidly shrinking prison, the echo of ruin was being crushed between two opposing, absolute concepts, Dumbledore's indelible love and Strange's unyielding logic. For a creature born of inconsistency, it was oblivion. The shriek reached an unbearable crescendo. The golden sphere, now no bigger than a fist, glowed with the intensity of the sun. Then, with a final silent pop, it vanished. The energy backlash was immense, but it was not an explosion. It was an implosion of concepts. The oppressive silence was replaced by the familiar, comforting hum of the castle. The rotted patch on the wall restored itself, stone by solid stone. The bruised clouds on the enchanted ceiling parted, revealing a placid, star-dusted night sky. A profound exhaustion washed over Strange, and he stumbled back, his legs weak. The cloak of levitation swooped around him, holding him up. Across the hall, Dumbledore sagged, leaning heavily on the high-backed throne of the headmaster's chair which had reappeared behind him. The silvery light of his memory had faded, but the deep sorrow in his eyes remained, a fresh and painful wound. Hermione rushed forward, her wand lowered. Did it work? Is it gone? Strange took a deep, shuddering breath, extending his senses. He felt the clean, ancient lines of Hogwarts magic, the steady thrum of its wards reasserting themselves, stronger than before. The discordant static, the feeling of a wound in reality, was gone. It's gone, he confirmed, his voice rough. Expelled. Erased from this reality. He looked at Dumbledore, a man who had willingly weaponized his own deepest trauma to save his home. The arrogant Strange had arrived with felt like a memory from another man's life. You were right, he said, the admission costing him nothing now. That was a power beyond my understanding. Dumbledore offered a weak but genuine smile. And your control, your mastery of forces I can barely comprehend, was a power beyond mine. It seems even old headmasters and Sorcerer Supreme have things to learn. An hour later, Strange stood once more in the great hall, the first hints of dawn painting the enchanted ceiling in shades of rose and gold. His energy was restored, his purpose clear. Hermione stood beside him, a notebook in her hand, filled with frantic, barely legible notes on dimensional theory. I've recalibrated the traversal spell, Strange said. There should be no unexpected detours this time. Will you remember us? Hermione asked, her voice small. The multiverse is a vast library, Miss Granger, Strange replied, a rare, soft smile touching his lips. And this has been one of its more illuminating sections. It is not one I am likely to forget. He looked at her, at the fierce, unyielding intelligence in her eyes. Do not ever let anyone tell you your magic is quaint or unrefined. Its roots go deeper than you can imagine. Logic is a tool to understand the world. But intent is a tool to change it. You have a powerful grasp on both. Hermione beamed, her cheeks flushing with pride. Dumbledore approached, his gait steady once more. He held out a hand. Strange took it, a firm, respectful handshake between equals. Should you ever find yourself adrift in the cosmic currents again, Doctor, the headmaster said, his eyes twinkling, know that Hogwarts will always offer a safe harbor. Thank you, headmaster. For everything. With a final nod, Strange stepped back. He raised his hands, this time with practiced, effortless grace. A portal tore open in the air before him, a swirling vortex of kaleidoscopic light that showed a tantalizing glimpse of a familiar circular window, the seal of the Vishanti, the Sanctum Sanctorum. He gave one last look at the ancient wizard and the brilliant young witch. Then, with a wry salute and a final, playful flourish from his cloak, Dr. Stephen Strange stepped through the portal and was gone. The gateway snapped shut, leaving behind only the scent of ozone and the silence of the morning. Dumbledore and Hermione stood together for a long moment, watching the spot where he had vanished. "Well," Dumbledore said, his voice laced with a weary amusement. "That was, without a doubt, the most unusual start to a school year I have ever experienced." He turned to leave, but then he paused, his gaze fixed on the castle's ancient stone wall. He ran a hand over the surface, a thoughtful frown on his face. Hermione moved closer, curious. "Professor? What is it?" Woven into the faint, silvery glow of the castle's restored wards, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a new pattern. It was a delicate, intricate filigree of impossibly perfect geometric lines, humming with a faint, golden light, a pattern that was not of their world. It was a scar, a signature, a subtle but permanent echo of the magic that had saved them. "It appears, Miss Granger," Dumbledore murmured, a strange and contemplative light in his eyes, "that our uninvited sorcerer has left us a parting gift. A reminder that the universe is far larger and more wonderfully complex than any of us truly know." And in the quiet of the Great Hall, the ancient magic of Hogwarts and the cosmic law of the Sorcerer Supreme resonated together in a new and not entirely disharmonious song.